Hello and welcome. I'm Eloise Shelton, founder of Vanilla Recruitment. We specialise in recruiting for office, accountancy, marketing and HR roles on a permanent and temporary basis. Today's HRHuddle webinar is with Stephanie Smith of Stephanie Smith Financial Planning, and she's going to discuss with us how we can support the financial well-being of employees to produce their productivity and improve employee retention. So today's session will be recorded and sent to you in the next week with the slides and Steph's contact details. Please do feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as we go along, or pop them in the chat box, and I will I'll ask Steph the questions as she's going through the session. So thank you for joining us, and I'll pass you over to Steph.
Thanks, Eloise. Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here with you. I'm just going to share my screen now and hope that everything works there. So hopefully you can all see the screen okay. Has that come up?
Yep, that's good.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So yeah, today's session is on unlocking potential, looking at the strategic advantage of financial well-being programs in organisations. Before I start that, I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit. So I am a regulated financial advisor. I'm a partner in St James's Place Wealth Management, one of the UK's largest wealth managers. But prior to becoming a financial advisor, I actually have a background in marketing communications, employee engagement, and I also ran a wellbeing business for a number of years. And it was actually during that time, I worked with quite a few people who had both mental and physical health issues, and there was quite a strong link to their financial health. So I've actually got such a vested interest in helping people improve their financial health and well-being, because I've seen the adverse effects in previous businesses that I've run and clients that I've worked with. And I think overall now I've got quite an interesting mix of expertise that kind of helps me work with clients in this area as well. So what we're actually going to cover today, just the agenda, a little bit around financial well-being itself and the importance of it. I thought to just talk about the current landscape, where we are and what's changing and might be impacting employee financial well-being. The benefits of running a program, a little bit about the strategy and the implementation of a program that supports your employees and benefits organisations. And really supporting that, I've got quite a good case study to talk through with you that gives you some example of how we've seen a program work for a particular client. And then we'll cover obviously some of the challenges and how you measure success of programs as well. I'm more than happy to ask questions as we go along. We have got a Q&A block of time at the end, but please, if you've got any particular questions along the way, then just flag them in the chat, and Eloise can pass them on to me. So first of all, then, I think we've probably all got our own interpretation of what financial well-being is. I quite like this description from the Money and Pension Service, that it's about feeling secure and in control, about making the most of your money, being able to deal with the unexpected, and being on track for a healthy financial future. Being financially resilient, being confident, and feeling empowered. And I think, there are a number of models around employee well-being, the 5, 6, 7 pillars, depending on which model you come across. And all of them tend to feature financial well-being. But from my kind of personal point of view, I see financial well-being, the pillar of financial well-being, as almost being the foundation of so many others, because money and its impact and its importance in our lives is really there from the day we're born until we're no longer here. And it actually enables and restricts people in some of those other areas that make up those pillars of health. So for me, I think it's, it really is a fundamental one. There are plenty of stats. I'm going to go through a few of them. I don't want to get into too many stats all the way through, because it could be quite heavy if we did that. But I think that before we get on to some of that, this is one of the other important things, and that's to do with how we feel about money, and the taboo that exists around money. I mean, here in the UK, it's a very difficult money conversation. People do not like talking about money a lot of the time. And in fact, the Imperial College of London did some research a few years ago. And in that research, they discovered that people are 7 times more likely to tell a stranger about their sex life than they are to share financial details like how much they earn, which I think is just remarkable. But I think, that's the challenge we're up against. It's, that's the starting point for it. And we're not taught about lots of basics around money and at school, but a lot of what we learn is absorbed from, our parents or our caregivers, where we kind of put together the money beliefs and the stories that we have. And actually, a lot of this is around behavior and behavior towards money, as well as, a lot of people will say to me, oh, I'm useless at maths, that's why I'm no good with money. But there are so many other factors that come into it. So for me as well, I think that's an important part of it when you're considering financial well-being. And when I'm talking to individuals or talking to businesses, there's the facts and figures side of it, if you like, and there's so much the emotional side of it, and it's finding the right balance between those when we start to engage with people and talk through with it. So just moving on then to the current landscape, and as I said, I think there are plenty of statistics out there. There are lots of different wellness surveys and different places that you can find resources. These are just a few of the ones that I think are kind of key and relate then to what I'm talking about in the current landscape. Again, from my position within the financial services industry, one of the things that is quite astounding is the financial literacy level in the UK. We're ranked 15 out of 29 countries that make up something called the OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Countries and Development, and that includes most of the European countries. So we're way behind countries like Norway and France in terms of the literacy that we've got across the UK. And of course, that's going to have an impact further down the line in terms of people's financial resilience, stress around finances, and just being able to cope with the unexpected that often happens to people from a financial perspective. I've touched on the fact that we're not taught this at school. There are some movements, and it's something that the last government was looking at as well, to start to engage with children in school around financial education that's relevant to us when we leave school. Because I think that's one of the big challenges that we have as well, is that that what we learn at school doesn't necessarily relate to what we see when we come out of school. And I mentioned when I get to the case study, I'll talk in a bit more detail, but I have had conversations with youngsters where, because they're not taught things at school, that they get themselves into debt because they don't understand how interest rates work. They don't understand how compound interest works on credit cards, that kind of thing. And there's some very simple measures that could come into play that can help people. I think, that we all know that post-COVID, we've had a quite challenging, during COVID as well, challenging financial environment. And in the last couple of years, the cost of living crisis has been something significant as well. And the stats there on the right-hand side of the screen sort of relate into that as well. In one of the more recent surveys that's been done by PricewaterhouseCoopers, 57% of the employees that they surveyed cited finances as the top cause of stress in their lives. And, I wouldn't be surprised if that figure's not higher, because lots of people won't talk about their money worries anyway. From the productivity point of view, financial worries result in a loss of something around 17.5 million working hours each year. And I think, we recognise that the more anxious or stressed somebody is about things in life, they're going to sleep less, that they might lack focus, and that's going to affect productivity and affect the health as well. I think the other thing that does have a bearing is, you know, the workplace trends where people are working from their own home and maybe not in an environment that has some interesting elements. I'm not necessarily going into these in much detail today, but you know, if people are in the environment, so if they can't afford their mortgage and they're working at home every day, that stress around the mortgage is there as a constant reminder. You know, escaping to the workplace actually sometimes can be a relief for somebody. But if they're now, you know, if they're working from home, that can actually increase that level of stress around them. I think the other thing just to consider as well, and at the moment, you know, this is probably looking to the future as well. We've had a change of government. We know there's a budget coming. We know all the headlines are out there and there's quite a lot of doom and gloom. So there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And this definitely showed during COVID, post-COVID, and as we went into the cost of living crisis, when I was working with some of my clients on financial well-being, that uncertainty leads to so much more stress and anxiety for people on top of what they already know about their own situation. So, you know, these are real kinds of touch points and catalysts for people beginning to lose financial resilience and be struggling a bit more with their financial health. So what can we do to help, or and where do the benefits of running a program sit for people? Well, if we look first from the employee perspective, I think very much, you know, if first of all, just being able to talk about something or learn about something that might help change their current situation can help their mental and physical health and well-being. As a result, that leads to improved productivity, you know, and I've had people say to me, "Oh, I used to sit at work worrying about this. Now I understand budgeting better. I don't have to think about it at work." And, you know, it just immediately makes a difference to people. That's going to help with their financial security and resilience. And for me, one of the other important areas is around this thing I call legacy learning. If you are able to teach somebody a life skill around money, it is a life skill for them, and it can also have a ripple effect onto work colleagues, friends and family. And again, you know, I've got examples where I've worked with a youngster or a couple of youngsters via one of my employee wellbeing programs who learned a budgeting technique and took that home and told their parents about it, and now the whole family are doing it. And you know, that can be the impact, because these are some of these the skills are very simple to communicate, they just have never been communicated to people before. So there's definitely an element of legacy learning and, you know, greater well-being, which can come back to the organization that's putting those schemes in place. So from an employer perspective then, obviously one of the things that we're looking at with any of these sort of engagement programs is what's going to be a benefit back into the organization. How are we going to see that, you know, it's been a worthwhile endeavor? And I think, you know, first of all, around if you're improving people's mental and physical well-being as a result of this, then their attendance, whether it's actually a reduction in absenteeism or just a reduction in presenteeism because they're more focused and they're actually present when they're at work, is certainly a big one. There's definitely benefits around productivity linked to that, and around the general mental health area as well, because if you're reducing the stress and anxiety around finances, that helps people's mental health. And there's other studies that show that people that have increased mental health issues, or their mental health is poor, are more likely to then suffer financial stress. So it turns into a bit of a never-ending circle. So you can start to release that cycle a little bit. I think definitely from some of the studies, there's a CIPD study that talks quite a bit about the impact of retention and acquisition in terms of, you know, talent acquisition, where engagement programs are running, and particularly where employees are looking for companies that are going to support them in different areas, and financial well-being is a big area of this. In fact, the PricewaterhouseCoopers survey has a figure around 60 to 64% of employees are looking for companies that are offering financial well-being programs and offer employee benefits that support them from that financial perspective. I think as well, there's definitely competitive advantage. You know, it's interesting the sort of knock-on impact that the financial well-being program that we run for the case study I've got, you know, just in terms of the overall goodwill towards the company that comes from both the employees, but then, you know, financial well-being has such a direct impact on loved ones around that employee, that I think, you know, you've got that kind of very, very evident ripple effect. If you're helping somebody move from being stressed because they're in debt to no longer being in debt, and, you know, risks of losing their house or not being able to pay the mortgage vanish, it's just has such a different impact. So being a company that has this at the forefront of thinking for employees, I think is very strong from the competitive advantage perspective. Excuse me, I'm just checking how I'm doing on time. So
You're doing fine.
I'm okay, am I? I think one of the kind of key areas to talk around, and I'm going to talk around this sort of the theory, and then I'll talk around it in terms of the case study, so you can sort of understand how it's worked in practice. And I think, you know, it's a fairly standard model to follow, and there are others, but if we start, you know, the first step is obviously getting support and getting engagement and a strategic direction for something like a financial wellbeing program in the organization. Now, if you're a company that already runs some kind of employee engagement strategy, then this may very well fit in to the overriding communication plan that you've got, to the overriding strategy that you've got. You know, the stakeholders may already be engaged because it's seen as a next step. I think, you know, one of the common conversations that I used to have in previous careers, and having this one in this area as well, is, you know, how tangible are the returns on the investment in a program like this? And it's hard to measure that. And I think that at the outset, it's about producing those KPIs, those measurements, those protocols and the goals that the company is aiming for as part of the business case. We'd move on to needs assessment, and I think this is really key when you're looking at financial well-being. The workforce demographic is really important, because depending on that demographic, there are some hot topics depending on what your employee mix looks like, and there are some fundamental education points that you can make that are relevant, but there are definitely areas where there will be different stresses and anxieties according to slightly different demographic types. So being able to identify, you know, maybe, and this is where I talk about the next point, the employee financial well-being temperature, you may already recognize that there's a particular part of your employee audience where financial well-being is going to be best received and most effective as your first port of call. In the case study, we worked with a company that has over 3,000 employees across the UK. They had a particular office that had quite a young audience. So immediately, in terms of what that audience might want to hear around financial education, was very different. It would be around, you know, budgeting. It would be around understanding how you get your first mortgage, what are interest rates, rather than maybe some of the more senior members of the teams who might be more interested in how to avoid the tax trap when you move into the higher rate tax band, and other things that are IHT planning or retirement planning, things that are maybe more relevant to the audience further along in their career and life cycle. I think the other really key thing is, what are your existing resources? And that isn't just material, it's, do you have people in the team who are competent, confident to take on this type of guidance and education, or is it something that you're going to need the external expertise for, and to look to bring in and support a team to actually either produce content, deliver content, or a mix of the two, so that you're getting the right resource mix in place early on. And also, how do existing employee benefits sort of interact and interface with the wellbeing strategy that you're putting in place? So another example of that is where I've worked with a company where it came to light that very few people actually understood their internal pension scheme. So just understanding how the pension scheme runs is almost separate to understanding generally how pensions operate. And it came to light as we went through that actually just some internal communication, some different resources available to employees around that particular area could make a difference as well. So the needs assessment might throw up some very easy ways to sort of raise financial guidance and education internally anyway. How you deliver it, depending on size of your organization, the demographic split, the geographic split might lead to different options. Clearly, things like webinars are really great because you can deliver them live, you can record them, people can access them as and when. And I think it's about making sure that you've got information there that is relevant to those different topics you want to cover and those different demographics. And then there might be other interventions to meet employee needs. So if you've got a culture that's quite interactive and inclusive, and your team are happy talking, and again, I have had clients where they're quite happy to kind of all sit down and uncomfortable initial conversations, but they were more willing to share and learn how each other were kind of needing financial support or help, or what their issues were, and it actually brought that team much closer together. In other cases, it might be that you do online confidential money clinics or face-to-face money clinics, so that people have an opportunity to sit down with somebody and get some sort of individual guidance. They might not feel comfortable to do it in that more group setting. The modelling and testing, I think, is quite important to make sure that what you're doing works. So if you can, roll something out on a small basis first of all, or do something that just pinpoints one particular area that's come out of your needs assessment, then you can refine it and move on. And that's really where the rollout and the evaluation, there's almost like a mini circle that goes on between your design, your rollout, your evaluation as well, because sometimes things don't land, or that the take up for a webinar might not be quite what you anticipated it being, and there might be some better way to do things. Again, alongside the webinars, I think if you've got things like a company intranet, or it's somewhere where people can access resources and almost access them anonymously, then I think that's another popular thing to consider. So again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in the case study as well. In terms of the communication around this area, I mean, I think I've got used to walking into rooms and people kind of groaning, oh God, it's a financial advisor, or, people just don't like to deal with finances. So it's also finding ways to sort of make the titles uplifting, make it interesting, make it to make it as I've lost the word, it will come back in a minute, but to make it informal and to take away the intimidation around finances, I think is really important. So we came up with a number of webinars for the client I'm going to talk about, and we kind of themed them, and they had, you know, names that relate. We ran one on, actually ended up running on Valentine's Day. So we had a kind of, you know, how to fall in love with your finances type titles, just to sort of bring people to what is generally considered quite a dry and not very interesting subject to a lot of people, until of course they come along and hear some good stuff that helps make life changes. So I think that's a really important thing as well. And, you know, again, linked to that, if you've got some, you know, role models in the business, or having those stakeholders be involved and interested and asking questions, so that it's not seen as you know, it's not a top-down directive, but also it is something that is inclusive at all levels across an organization. I think that's really important as well. In terms of evaluation, I'm going to touch on this a little bit. I think, you know, it is something that again, because it's it's an emotive subject, it can be quite private. There will be signs within the business that you can measure, but one of the things that we've found interesting is we've done feedback that's come both from the employer, and also then I've engaged with people that I've met in money clinics and done follow-up with them later, maybe 6 months to a year later, after perhaps having a meeting with them, just really to see how they're getting on, or, you know, that there's been a reason for a follow-up. And it's been a really interesting way to get feedback in terms of the benefit that they've had from the programs. So a little bit less of a formal measurement, but very useful nonetheless, to be able to feed that back into the organization as well. And, you know, with everything, it's an iterative process. Some things will work well in a certain setting, some things won't work well in another setting. And the financial world is complex and ever changing. So there will be subject matters coming up that we just haven't thought about yet, or, you know, things that might require a slightly different approach along the way. And it's just a question of evaluating it as you go through. So I'll talk about this case study because I think it gives quite a clear idea around how we sort of implemented a number of different things. And I might flip back to the process model as well. Heidelberg Materials, it's rebranded. It was Hansen, but they're part of Heidelberg, who are a European company. So I have been working with the UK part of the business for the past 3 years, and they have an incredibly strong commitment to employee well-being as an organisation. They've got, you know, they're very active in different areas to support their employees, and as part of that employee wellbeing strategy, they wanted to look at financial wellbeing. So we undertook with them a bit of a needs assessment to really understand the demographic and geographic split, because they are across the UK, from way up north to way down south. They deal in cement, so, you know, some of these people work on noisy quarries. You know, they're not all just sitting in offices. There's, you know, some quite interesting kind of logistical areas to think about in terms of how to provide something that was going to be a reasonable mix across the business as well. And we kicked off initially, having sort of looked at it and decided what we wanted to help them achieve. We kicked off with a fairly generic webinar that was kind of fundamentals of finances, because there is something in that for everybody. You know, and it's interesting, you know, we go through life, and I know lots of business owners and people in very senior positions who, you know, manage millions and still don't know what that particular line on their salary statement that they get once a month actually means. So, you know, even as basic as kind of really understanding what your payslip says, right the way through to much more complex tax issues, or, you know, complex estate planning for future generations. There are so many elements to this. So just coming up with something that touched on a few of the fundamentals that might whet the appetite of those different demographics was sort of where we started. And it was part of a health and wellbeing week as well. It was obviously recorded and available on their sort of intranet. What we did after that was we ran financial awareness money clinics. So we decided to do online sessions. So basically, people had a 45-minute session with myself to ask any question they wanted to. And obviously it was anonymous in as much as there was a booking system, but no one else within the organization would know if someone was coming and having a money clinic. And clearly the conversations were confidential. So the range of questions, you know, it is as broad as you can possibly imagine. Some people were, you know, needing or wanting signposting for debt management support. Other people literally were wanting to understand, you know, I want to save for a mortgage or save for a house. How do I start saving? How do I budget? Right the way through to, you know, I'm planning on retiring. Nobody knows yet. How do I work out what I've got in my pension pots, or what do I do with my pension pots? So, you know, there's a real kind of broad mix. The interesting thing with the online ones is that the attendance rate was really, really high. I prior to it did expect that I'd probably get, you know, quite a few no-shows, but actually anybody that didn't turn up rebooked. It was normally because another meeting had crept in and they rebooked, and you know, so we had just shy of, I'd say, about 90 to 95% attendance to those clinics first time round. We then followed up in 2023 with a series of themed webinars, which I've mentioned. So, you know, these were a bit more answering specific demographics. They were trying to, you know, be encouraging to attend in terms of the way that the content was described and the way that they were titled. And they were done in a way that you could attend all three if you wanted, or if you know, one particular webinar kind of touch that demographic or that particular need, then that was fine. After those, we then ran more online clinics, and also tried face-to-face clinics, because there was a need and a desire to, you know, actually have people. Some people don't want to do online, that they wanted face-to-face, and that was interesting as well. Again, they were well attended. The particular office that we ran them in did have quite a younger demographic, so there were a lot of kind of questions around mortgages and, you know, starting a family and thinking about all of the, you know, those early needs of kind of financial management. I would say, you know, things to think about, and they did very well there, having a private room that was away from, you know, everyone else, rather than a meeting room where people felt they might be overheard. I think some people still didn't want to be seen to be coming to a face-to-face space, so I think there's a real benefit in running both, because some people, you know, that it's just they just felt that it was too exposing even to come and sit and have a meeting. The interesting thing was, again, you know, some people would leave that meeting and they'd go back and kind of tell their colleagues and go, God, it was brilliant, and you need to go and have one. And actually we got demand as a result just of that kind of ripple effect as well. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of doing it face-to-face rather than online. You don't get that impact. So, you know, there's kind of pros and cons to both approaches. And I think actually it sort of normalizes talking about it. If you've got an environment or a culture where people are willing to kind of share and talk, it's so much more beneficial, because let's face it, we may not all be in exactly the same financial circumstances, but we're we are often facing the same issues or feeling stress around that subject matter as well. So it can help to air it. We then, at the beginning of 2024, again, really as much because of demand, we ran a series of face-to-face clinics again. And interestingly, I had some people that came back because they wanted to sort of come back and talk about, you know, the next stage of where they were in terms of moving on with their finances and you know, kind of continuing their financial journey. So it was it's been really, really well received. And I think that now it's established, you know, it will continue in different formats going forward, because it's definitely had a lot of benefit to the employees that attended it and for the company as a whole. So in terms of sort of formal feedback, that we did do some feedback, and I know that you know, that the team at Heidelberg did get direct feedback that has been useful for them. So I think it is something where there's maybe some cynicism and some skepticism up front, and I'm going to come on to this as one of the challenges. And as soon as you can actually put something in place and get, you know, elicit feedback from people that have experienced it, I think it helps then to sort of start the ball rolling. So practical steps and challenges. This is, I guess, this is sort of from the experiences. I think one of the things I'd say as well, just in terms of understanding your audience and you know, using the data to tailor effectively. I have had a couple of other instances. I was invited to do a webinar for another very, very large company during they were running a parent family week, and it was challenging because the audience wasn't just from the UK. So it was a European audience. So there are certain factors that are always going to be, you know, the same, but it much more difficult when there are cultural differences and there are legislative differences, which, you know, we can't talk on. We can't give a guidance and advice outside of the guidance and education outside of the UK. Certainly not advice. So that was, you know, that was a bit of a challenge, and might probably on reflection been better addressed through, you know, breaking it down a little bit. But that's where I think, you know, doing the data analysis is important. You know, topic-led sessions are popular because people can really home in on something, or identifying common problems or common questions people have about finances. That leads them to you know, yeah, that sounds like the one for me. The communication is key, and you know, defining those metrics that you're going to measure the success by. The challenges, I think, you know, one of the key challenges with all of these areas around wellbeing and looking at running any program is, you know, having budget or allocating budget to this over something else. I haven't got any fast answers on that, I'm afraid. I think it's, you know, that might be a good discussion point rather than something I can give too much on. I think employee skepticism is another area that, with this in particular, is it skepticism or is it just people feel really uncomfortable talking about this subject? So, you know, thinking around that and trying to normalize it in different ways, I think is really important. And I think that leads into the, you know, the lack of engagement, because if it's something that people feel, oh God, I'm going to be singled out, or I'm really uncomfortable talking about it, I don't want to be in some kind of, you know, interactive circle of people sharing my deep financial secrets. You know, it's all about how you look to engage with that audience. That's just some, you know, some of the key drivers that I don't think there are any particularly new or different KPIs in there, except perhaps the last one. And I think this is the one where the feedback that I've done alongside and reaching back out to, you know, people I've seen when I've worked with organisations, the behavioural change side of things, and that's a massive part of what I do, when I'm doing sessions like this, but also as an advisor. You know, and it's having those good news stories of I had someone in particular who wanted to buy a car. He spent all of his money gaming. He said to me, I spend my monthly salary, the entire lot goes on gaming, but I want to buy a car. So we talked about a particular tool that you can use, or a process for budgeting. I pointed him in the direction of a little app he could use. And 6 months later, he said to me, I don't spend my money on gaming anymore. I've got a lovely, healthy deposit towards a car. And that just means, you know, from the perspective of him as an employee, he can drive. You know, he starts to become an employee that can do other things for the business moving forward. And he's now financially resilient as well as feeling more empowered. So, you know, things around behavioural change have a knock-on effect as well. That brings me to the Q&A section. Shall I stop my share at this point, Eloise?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So feel free, guys, to put any questions that you've got in the chat box, or unmute yourself. So thanks, Steph, for going through things. I think, you know, I know from being an employer and just working myself how much, if you've got something on your mind, you know, whether it's anything to do with your well-being, but in particular, you know, financial well-being, like you said, is incredibly stressful. How it does impact on your own productivity, you know, and if you impact, you know, I was going to say, you amplify that to the amount of employees that people have, especially in the economic times that we've had recently and got coming up. So it is something that I think we really need to address. I have got some questions that people have sent in that weren't able to attend live. If I can ask you some of those.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I've been asked to ask, what would be your number one tip when considering financial well-being, when considering a financial well-being strategy for employees?
I think the number one tip is know the audience. So dig a little bit deeper into that, what I call that kind of financial well-being temperature. Who are you aiming at, and what are the kind of, what is it you're trying to address with what you're doing financial well-being? Because there will be different needs of the organisation, but I think if you can sort of identify and talk more specifically to, you know, some of the root cause, or what you understand the main areas to be. So, you know, again, if I go back to Heidelberg, they had, you know, across their entire employee mix, they've got all different ages and all different, you know, types of employee. But in this particular office, they had a group that were young, that were at the beginning of their careers, and that, you know, in the office, they would talk about, you know, their credit card debt from uni. How do you get a mortgage? How am I going to get a mortgage? But, you know, how do I save for a mortgage? So that kind of, there was a very specific area to focus on in terms of communicating with that audience and coming up with something that was going to appeal to them. So I think it's definitely, you know the audience, know who you're aiming at, do that needs assessment to really get under the bonnet of that.
Okay, great. Jen has asked, what would be a good starting point for a financial well-being webinar? So is there a recurring theme that you find comes up?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think again, you know, I think there's a surprising number of people that, but budgeting's a really good one. Budgeting sounds really dull. You know, we'll get an Excel spreadsheet and write everything down. But actually, there are loads of really interesting apps out there. You know, there are apps where you have different pots to save into. And, you know, I think the way technology is moving, there's just there's a different kind of approach to it. But actually, some of the real fundamentals, you know, so understanding budgeting, there's a really simple budgeting principle that I talk about a lot with people. That is, it just makes such a difference. I think also some of the fundamentals that, you know, do you understand what interest rates are? Do you understand how compound interest works, or even what it is? Because that affects people from credit card debt, buying a house, how much your pension's going up by day. You know, that there are some fundamentals there. And again, it's how they're delivered to make them interesting and relevant, I think. But I think that's a good starting point. If you haven't got the time or the resources to do a number, then one that covers some of the fundamentals around kind of financial housekeeping and those areas, I think would be really good. And just also on that, our money beliefs. I think getting across to people, what is your money story? What is your, you know, what are your beliefs around money? Because that behavioural side of it is so important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear myself talking to my children all the time when I say, money doesn't grow on trees, you know, and you think, actually, you know, that scarcity belief that I'm passing down to another generation.
Yeah.
Do you know the value of money? Do you realize how much this has cost me to do when they're sitting there on their phones because they're not engaging in activities that we're doing? So or not appreciative of things we're doing as a family. So yeah, so they're obviously going to then grow up with the beliefs that I've had.
Yeah.
Meg has asked a question. So she's saying, what resources are available for HR leaders considering implementing a program? And I think what she's thinking about, you know, if they're implementing a program in-house.
Okay, so there are a number of free resources. This is the sort of information I can probably, you know, we can put in a follow-up pack, or if people want to email me. But there are free resources, things like Money Helper, Step Change, which is a debt management organisation. But there's a lot that they offer around financial wellbeing, and they speak directly to employee financial wellbeing programs as well. The CIPD, I think, do quite a lot of information, and there's quite a lot of resources there to help people as well. There are also then numerous companies that offer financial wellbeing support, financial wellbeing programs. And then obviously, you know, companies like myself or people like myself as well, where we are running financial guidance and education as one part of what we do, and then obviously can do financial advice on the other side. And the costs differ depending on what kind of program you want. So I think, you know, that there's a lot of resource out there that is free to help companies think about what they want their program to look like and how to set it up and potentially run it themselves. But obviously then there's expertise that can equally collaborate or deliver content for them.
Great, Steph, thank you.
So that helps.
Yeah, definitely. You've mentioned, just going back on one thing you've just said, actually, a question that springs to mind, because you talk about financial education and you talk about financial advice.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? So
something like a financial wellbeing program would give financial guidance and or education. So that's either teaching people elements of financial fundamentals, or you know, how mortgages work, whatever it might be. And the guidance piece as well is potentially signposting people to further information. So here's a budgeting tool, or here's the debt management support, and linking people to that kind of thing, and just guiding people. So it's more generic. So, you know, if someone said to me, "Oh, how do I get a mortgage?" I could talk in very kind of generic terms. And people that aren't regulated advisors can give that type of advice as well. So you get financial coaches, or you get financial educators who can deliver that type of information. If a client says, again, as an example, I'm in a position now to buy a house and I want a mortgage, then they might need to talk to somebody very specifically that can help them to have a mortgage. And that might so that's leading more into financial advice. Or if someone was to say to me in a guidance session, I want to retire, I've got a pension pot here and I've got 3 other pension pots and I don't know what to do with them, and I'm thinking about bringing them all together and doing something. Well, that you're talking very specifically to the individual at that point about their circumstances, and that sits outside of the financial guidance and education and starts to move down the advice route. So
Right.
there's just a bit of so in most cases within a wellbeing program, there'll be a clear delineation that says, right, this bit's the guidance and education, what you're wanting is advice, and that's separate. And in some cases they'll have to point them to external resources if they're doing so. If an organization is running their own wellbeing program and they start to get people like that, that's where you might need to refer to regulated advisor or at that external resource as well.
Great. And that they're people that are regulated and they are qualified to give that specific
Absolutely.
advice rather than the education.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Steph, that's been really really enlightening. Thank you. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat box now and I'll ask them, or if there's anything after the event that you think of and you think, oh, actually, I'd like to speak to Steph privately about that, then I will share all her contact details as well as the slides and some additional information as well. So, and I think Steph's going to put your contact details on there if anybody wants them straight away. But so thank you, Steph, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody else for joining as well. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. Oh, yeah, no, it's just somebody saying thank you. I didn't know if there was a question I was going to miss. So, yes, thank you for joining us. And I will get the recording out to you in a week's time. If there are any other future events or topics that you'd like us to cover, feel free to email me or pick up the phone and have a chat. And we can get things booked in. But thank you again, Steph, and I will speak to you all soon.